Hi, my name is Medhat Elmasry. Today we will together explore a new technology called Blazor. And Blazor is a client-side single-page application technology. You can build an entire client-side single-page application using C#. So that's the idea. And the topic for today is Blazor client-side app with CRUD operations against a web API endpoint. So we're going to be building a solution in Visual Studio Preview version, and it's going to comprise 3 projects. The first project is a class library. The second project is a web API server-side application. And the third project is a Blazor project that consumes the server-side web API application. Now, as far as setting up your environment is concerned, go to this site and it will help you set up your environment. That's exactly what I did. I installed the version of Visual Studio that's currently in preview mode. So let's look at my environment. First of all, let's go to the command prompt and have a look at my .NET version. And I'm going to start the preview version of Visual Studio. And there we go. And you can see here when it started it said preview. So I'm going to start a new project by clicking on create a new project. And I'm going to choose a class library because that's the first thing I want to do. And I'm going to choose this class library .NET standard. So let's go next here. Now my class library, I'm going to call it school library. And I'm going to save it in a different folder. In this play folder. So that should be good. These are the settings I have. The project name is school library. It's going to go into this location, but I do want to change the name of my solution file. I'll just call it school. So this is the latest. School library, this is the destination folder, and this is the name of my solution. So let's click on create. Now, I don't need this class.cs, so I'm going to delete it. And I'll create a new class called student. I just want to model a simple student class. So I'm going to go add class, and I'm going to call it student. Add. I'll replace my student class with the following. I have a student ID that is a string, and that would be somewhat the primary key. I've got a first name, a last name, and a school. And first name, last name, and school are required. Now we've got a squiggly under required, therefore we need to resolve something. Let's hover over here and click on this, and we can see that it's suggesting that we install this package. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Install package system component model. And the option here is find and install the latest version. Let's do that. So that should install for us a package. And then it disappears. So we're good. Now, this is all we need in this project. So I'm going to right click on the solution node right here, and I will choose to add a new project. So I'm going to go add new project. and I will add an ASP.NET Core web application. I'll call the project School API. Then click on Create. Now, I don't want ASP.NET Core 3.0 for the Web API project because 2.0 works good. So I'm going to choose 2.2, and for API I'll choose this template. So what I did here was ASP.NET Core 2.2, and I'm choosing the API template. And let's click on Create. We want to create a reference into the school library from the API project. So I'm going to right click here and go Add Reference. Add reference. I'm going to choose School Library and then click on OK. Now, because the version of .NET Core that is default on my system is 3.0, and I want to work from the command prompt to install certain packages and do a bunch of things under School API under 2.2, I need to add a global.json file that looks like this and put it in the root of my School API project. So the best way to do that is to go into the root folder for School API in a terminal window, and I'll do that by just coming here and typing ncmd. It will take me into my School API folder, and in here I'll run this command that will create for me a global.json file with version 2.2.103. Let's do that. So if I hit enter here and I do a dir, you will see that it indeed created for me a global.json file. My application requires SQL Server because I'm going to save my data in SQL Server. So I'm going to add these packages: Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server, Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server Design, and tools for tooling. So let's do this one by one. Run the first one. And then the second one. And then the third one. Okay, and we can close this. So we should see that these packages have been added under NuGet dependencies. And sure enough, here they are. Let's just build to make sure that we don't have any errors. Since I'm using SQL Server, I need to add a connection string in my app settings.json file. So let's open this, and at the top here I'm going to add a connection string, and this is what it looks like. A default connection is the name of the connection string, and my database name is going to be school.db, and the rest is trusted connection equals to true and multiple active result sets equals to true. So this is what my connection string looks like. I can close this file now and save it. Since I'm using Entity Framework to interact with the database, I need to create a DBContext class. So I'm going to create in the root of my API application a class called School DBContext. So I'm going to go add class, and I'll simply call this School DBContext. click on add. And I will replace the class definition with this. So going back to this class inherits from DBContext. It's got a DB set of students, and this is the constructor, and the constructor, it gets its options and it passes it on to the base class. In my onModel creating method, I'm going to create some seed data. I'm going to create 4 records. The primary key is going to be a GUID, and in the case of the first record, the first name is Jane, last name is Smith, and the school is medicine, and similar for the others. Now it seems I'm missing a closing brace, so let me add one here, and let's build, and I think we're good. We need to add some code in our startup.cs file so that we can use SQL Server and the connection string is recognized. So let's open up startup.cs, and in my configure services method, I'm going to add this code here. And let's resolve use SQL Server. And this is what the code looks like. Add DBContext based on this context class. And we're going to use SQL Server with this connection string that was defined earlier on in our appsettings.json file. We can now create a migration so that the commands for creating the tables in the database are created, and also the commands for doing data insertions are also created. So what I'll do at this point is I'll go back into a command prompt. I'll right click on School API and choose Open Folder in Explorer and type in here CMD so I can go into command prompt. Before we do any of the migration commands, it's important to do a rebuild so that the classes that we have are available in our environment. So I'm going to go build, rebuild solution. And I will execute the following migration command: .NET EF migrations add initial migration. This is an arbitrary name that I give to my migration. So let's hit enter here, see what's going to happen. So the end result is that it does something, and it will create for us a migrations folder here, and then there's a C# file here that's named by the name we gave our migration. Let's have a look at it. If you look at this command creates the student table with the primary key being student ID, and this command here inserts for us the data, and you can see that we're going to have 4 records, and each record has a primary key that happens to be a GUID. So this is what would execute when we actually create the database. The next thing we can do is run another migration command that actually creates the database. Let's go back into the command prompt and execute this command. Now this command will create for us the database. Let's do that. So when this is finished, you can see that a bunch of SQL statements were executed. This here executed the create table command, and over here all of this executed the insert data commands. So at this point we can be sure that we have data in the database and the database has been created. Let's create an API controller so we can see what's in the students table in the database. So we can come here, and in the controllers node I can go add controller. So I right clicked on the controllers node, I chose add controller. And over here, make sure that you select API on the left hand side under common, and choose this template, API controller with actions using entity framework. Click on that and add. For the main class, we want student, and for data DBContext, we want school DBContext. It happens to be the only DBContext around. And for controller name, we'll leave it at students controller. So this is what I've got. I'm going to click on add. At this point, our students controller has been created. Let us build. And if we want to run this, let's do Control F5 to run our application. It will end up with our values controller because that happens to be the default. But if I come here and I enter instead of values students and hit enter, it should show me my students. So we know that our database is working and our API is working. Let's do one small change. Close this, and then under properties, launch settings, which is over here, let's change the default API so that instead of values, it is students. I'll change values to students. And one more time here. Now if I build and I run Control F5, it should default to my students API. At this point, we've got an API, but before we start consuming that API, there's one other thing that we need to do. We need to enable CORS, and CORS stands for cross-origin resource sharing, and it means that a request coming from another domain will be allowed to use this resource or this service. So let's go back into Visual Studio and go into the startup.cs file, and we need to add CORS by adding this code here inside of my configure services method. And this basically adds a policy called policy, you can call it what you like, and it allows requests from any origin, any method, any header. That's the first step. The second step is to add another piece of code inside of my configure method, and this is where we're going to use CORS based on the policy we defined earlier on. And this is added in the configure method. It must be before use MVC. So let's build this. And if we run just to make sure it's working, that nothing has been broken, it is working. So let's close this and go on to the next step. Now we have now two projects. We need to add a third project here, which is really the project that we are mostly interested in, and that's our Blazor project. So just like we did when we added the API project, we're going to right click here and go add new project. And again, we're going to choose ASP.NET Core Web Application. Just click on next. For the name of the project, I'm going to call it School Client. Click on Create. Now on this screen, because Blazor comes with ASP.NET Core 3.0, I'm going to change the version to 3.0, and I'm just going to scroll down here and choose Blazor client side. These other options will be discussed in another video in the future, but for the moment this is what I'm going to choose. So I chose ASP.NET Core 3.0 and Blazor client side for the template. Now if you don't have these options, you probably need to set up your environment. So go back to the beginning of this video, and I gave you a link that you should go to in order to set up your environment. Now I'm going to click on Create. Let's run this application that was created for us and see what we have. So this is what you see. there are these tabs on the left hand side. So you have home, counter, and counter has some sort of functionality. When you click on this button, it increments the counter, and fetch data brings some data that is really hard-coded in a JSON file. Now, I'm going to demonstrate to you more about Blazor and WebAssembly by actually extending this application so that we can consume the API that we created that can allow us to retrieve students' data, add students' data, update students' data, and delete students' data. Just like we did with the previous project, we need to create a reference from the school API into our school client so that we can also use the student class. I'm going to add a reference here, add reference, and I'm going to check school library and click on OK. The next thing I want to do is, in order for the classes in school library to be visible to all the views in my client application under the root of the client app, there is this file called imports razor. Let's open that and then add a new line here, and the new line is simply a using statement saying we want to be able to use the classes in school library. So we can close this now. The pages that we saw earlier on, they're all defined here. There was the main page, the counter page, and the fetch data page. Let me make a copy of fetch data. I'll pretty much duplicate this. I'm going to go copy and paste. And I'll change this name to students. This is the page that I duplicated. Let me open the students page and I'll get rid of all the stuff. I'll delete it and I'll replace it with some other code that I'm going to explain in a moment. So what does this say? It says that my route for hitting this page is going to be simply /students. So if I enter this into the URL, it's going to come here. This is just a heading students and a paragraph that says this component demonstrates fetching data from the server. Now, this is where all my methods get added using this new Blazor framework. I'm defining a students array here that's made up of student objects, and then I've got a base URL. Now this base URL, we have to make sure that it matches the endpoint of our API. So how do we know that? Well, you can come here and check properties and go under debug, and then there is this port number for HTTPS. That's the one we need, and it would be 44340 here. 44340. That's the one we're using. Let's go back here and change this to 44340. Another way to find out is just to run the school API application and copy the URL. So this is the base URL. Now there is this method called onInitAsync, and that really means that when the page is loaded, it's going to load this method or run this method, and this method is going to call another method called load, and all this does is it makes a get call to this endpoint API students, which retrieves all the students, and it populates the students array. Now, if our students object is not equals to null, it's going to run this markup. This markup is just going to create a table. This is the head part of the table, and this is the body, and the body is simply, it iterates through the students array, and for every student it creates a row of data. It displays the student ID, the first name, the last name, and the school. I think the next step we should do is extend our menu system so that it has an entry for the students. So if you open up this file here, nav menu, and go and find out where the menu system is, and the menu system is down here. So I'm going to copy this and come here and paste it, and we said that the endpoint comes by going to students, so I'm going to change this to students, and this is what gets displayed. I'm going to make that students as well. So these are the two things I changed. I changed this endpoint for routing, and this is just a description. So now let's run this and see if it does what we want it to do. So I'm going to do Control F5, and sure enough, we have this students option. So let's click on it, and whoa, it's doing exactly what we wanted it to do. So it went off and it made a get call to our endpoint and brought in our students. That's wonderful. Let's continue by adding more functionality so we can add data, update data, and delete data. In order to add data, we must create a form for adding data, but then we need some instance variables. So I'm going to add some instance variables to my students Razor page, which is this one here, and I'm going to add a few instance variables. The ones that I need are an instance variable for student ID, first name, last name, and school. And I need to have a form. So I'm going to add a form down here. And the way this form works is, again, if my students array is not equals to null, I'm going to add this form. So it's going to have 3 input fields, one for first name, last name, and school. And notice that these variables are bound to these ones here. And when the insert button is clicked, it's going to call an insert method. Now I don't have that insert method, so let's add it. So I'm going to add an insert method down here. So the insert method, it goes to the same endpoint as before, and it instantiates a student object, and every time we insert a new student, we're going to generate a GUID, a new GUID for the student ID, and the names come from whatever the user has entered, and same with the school. It will make a post call to the endpoint and pass in the student object, and this method clears the fields, and we don't have that, so let's just add it. I'm gonna add it down here. So this just empties the fields, and then it reloads our data. So let's try this and see if it does what we want it to do. So let's go Control F5 again and click on students, and now I have a form here. So let me enter some data. So for first name, I'm just going to enter FN. For last name, I'm going to enter LN, and for school, I'm going to enter SCH and see what's going to happen. And sure enough, it added the data. Here it is. Now, I added an enum so that I can distinguish between 3 modes, between the insert mode, the update and delete mode, and none of the above mode. So I'm adding here an enum, and another instance variable. So this enum is called mode, and it's got either none, add, and edit, delete as its value. And when it starts off, it sets this mode value to none. And here I'm creating an instance for the student object that I'm going to use later on. So I would like to have an add button at the top of the table. So right before the table tag, I'm going to add an add button. And this add button will call the add method. Now, what does the add method do? Let's add an add method here, and I'll show you what I want it to do. I want this add method to clear the fields and set the mode to add. Now, over here, I added this code earlier on, and I want to add some more logic to it. I'm going to say open this form only when the mode is add. So I'm going to say and mode is add. So let's run this and see what are the changes that I've done. So let's build and let's run. So if I click on students again, it's going to have this new add button over here, and notice that the form is hidden here because the form only shows when I click this button, and when I click this button the form shows. So let me add something else. Click on insert, and it still works because you can see that my junk data has been added. What I want to do next is add some code for updating and deleting data. So I'm going to add another form here, and this form will be displayed only when mode is edit delete, and it's going to create an input field that is hidden, and it's going to put in it the student ID. We don't need people to see the student ID or change it because that's a primary key. We leave it as is, and it's going to display the first name, the last name, the school, and then it's going to have two buttons. One button is for updating and another button is for deleting. So we have two methods that we need to write here. One is for update and one is for delete. So let us add these two methods. Let me add first the method for update. Let's take this and indent it in. So for update, again, I'm going to go to this endpoint, but when you do an update, you have to pass the primary key or the student ID in this case. Then you instantiate a student object from the student ID that's in a hidden field, and the first name, last name, and school, this is whatever the user might have or might have not changed. Then we're going to make a put request to the endpoint and pass it the object. Clear the fields, reload the data, and set the mode to none. The next code I want to add is delete. Let me come here and add the delete code. And the delete code is the easiest of them all, because the endpoint is simply the same endpoint that we had for edit, but you don't need to pass any object. For the object argument, you just pass null, because all it needs to know is the primary key, and at the back end it's just going to delete the record. After that, we clear the fields, we reload, and we set the mode to none. Now the thing is, how do we select a field? Well, we select the field by simply clicking on a row in the table. So we're going to change the code for the row. In other words, the tr element here. Instead of this tr element, I'm going to add this. And this tr element is going to have an onClick method. And this onClick method is going to call a method called show, and pass it student ID. And the student ID simply comes from the item. Now we don't have a method called show, so let us add that method. Let's go down to the bottom here and add the show method. And this show method, it takes an ID. First of all, it goes and finds the student object by passing the ID, so it makes a GET request, a simple GET request. It assigns the instance variables with values, and then it sets the mode to edit delete. Let's try this out. So here I am, I've got my students option here. Let me highlight this, and sure enough it displays at the bottom here. Let me update this. So instead of XX and YY and ZZ, let me enter an actual name, Bob, and let us say plumber. And he's in the school of machinery. And click on update. And sure enough, there we go. Bob plumber machinery has been updated here. Let's delete this one. So if I click on this and I hit delete, it's gone. So this shows that our application is actually working. I hope you benefited from this video, and if you like it, please subscribe to my channel and give it a good like. Thank you, and I hope to see you in future videos. Take care and goodbye.